humanity stepping deeper and deeper and deeper into the light, drawing with greater aperture from the infinite well of wisdom, are becoming much wiser and, for lack of a better word, much more intelligent. Yet it is not intellectualism, but rather much more developed in their capacity to function at a very high level, which includes the capacity to perceive truth from falsity. So, in a very simplified way, it could be said, in a relative sense, those on the path of darkness are becoming more stupid. Hi, welcome back for today's channel. This is the book which I co-wrote with my guides called The 3 Awakenings That Save Humanity. It's available in the paperback, ebook and audiobook, and the links for this are below the video. If you would like a private channeling session with me, that's also possible. You will see a link below this video which takes you to a form where you can make an inquiry, and that just starts a conversation, doesn't commit you to anything. If you enjoy this video, please like, share, subscribe, comment, and there must be something else. I never get them all. Or let's just move ahead anyway. So we'll go to the topic for today, which is Awakening Update. So I would like to get an update on the state of humanity's awakening at this time. You know, relative to where it was, where we're going, that kind of thing. Okay, so here we go. Greetings and thank you for the request to be updated. The Awakening Update is a good topic for today because there is a nexus point which is being approached, and this nexus point will change things so dramatically that you'll see it initiates the precipitous fall of those that are being motivated by the darkness, the cabal of darkness, who have centered themselves around the darkness end of the spiritual spectrum. And when this nexus point is crossed and this precipitous fall begins, the rate of awakening will be explosive, because so much which has been secreted away, expunged from your societies, will be disclosed. And the disclosure will occur in many, many different fields of humanity simultaneously. Yet, there will need to be some form of metering of this information, because what humanity is on the verge of realizing is the reality which it has taken for granted as being the truth is remarkably different to what the truth actually is, in many, many different ways. A chief executive of one of the Central Intelligence Organizations of the United States historically said that the disinformation program will be complete when everything that Americans believe is false. This has been the objective. and for the cabal of darkness, secrecy and deception, and getting your subjugates or your enemy or your host from which you parasitically nourish self to believe in something which is entirely different to reality, for them is a revered science. It is an art form. And so, for their own benefit, they have constructed this false reality. But also, they do it from a sense of art, from a sense of accomplishment. And this is why that statement from the chief executive of one of the central intelligence organizations of the United States said that when the program is complete, it was said in this way because that will be when the art form has been perfected. The effectiveness of their program of deception would be adequate well before this endpoint is reached. Yet they still aim for the endpoint because of this artistic desire for perfection. So, humanity as a whole is moving towards the light, polarizing to the lightness end of the spiritual spectrum, which is representative of what humanity actually is. Humanity has arisen from the One, and the One is love and light. Therefore, humanity itself is forged from these same building blocks. So, a movement towards the reality, the truth of what humanity is a movement towards the light. And characteristic of the lightness end of the spiritual spectrum is truth. So, the way this is manifesting is humanity is becoming more truthful. Humans are choosing to represent themselves with integrity more and more. And this includes speaking the truth to each other. And this speaking the truth to each other is not only a motivation of the light, but also an adaptation to this new appearing quality in humanity, which is each individual's increasing capacity to perceive what is the truth and what isn't the truth. Individuals are experiencing, although maybe not aware, a greater difficulty to be deceiving. The lies that could have been told 25 years ago and believed cannot be told today and believed. This is a mass phenomenon on your entire planet. And so each individual is naturally adapting and speaking more truthfully, acting from a place of greater integrity. Because this is the assembling crystalline structure of the integrity matrix, it could be said. So, this creates a problem for those that are engineering the false narrative. What they could have said in the past and receive mass adoption, integration as the truth, yet it was false, cannot be done successfully today. So, they must become much more sophisticated in their ability if they are going to keep pace with this new developing quality of humanity, of perceiving what is truth and what isn't, with a sense of clarity which has never been part of the human psyche before. Those that are focused around the negative end, the darkness end of the spiritual spectrum, in a spiritual sense, they are unsophisticated beings because they have chosen to be philosophically on this path of darkness. Then they have also made the choice, because it can not be not made, as it is intrinsic to the path of darkness, to be beings of intellectual nature, very dominated by the mind. And as such, this mind dominance, this denial of their extra dimensionality, was a very effective strategy for them initially. However, what is occurring now is the relative intelligence of those that are on the path of darkness and those who are on the path of light is beginning to shift. And wisdom, which is drawn from the light, is infinite in capacity, whereas intellect is finite. And so while they try to be tactical from a place of raw intellect, they are being overwhelmed by this burgeoning capacity to see with great clarity, which is intrinsic to the light. Humanity stepping deeper and deeper and deeper into the light, drawing with greater aperture from the infinite well of wisdom, are becoming much wiser and, for lack of a better word, much more intelligent. Yet it is not intellectualism, but rather much more developed in their capacity to function at a very high level, which includes the capacity to perceive truth from falsity. So, in a very simplified way, it could be said, in a relative sense, those on the path of darkness are becoming more stupid because they are not expanding, having made that choice of full investment in the tangibility of the 3D illusion, which is limited to intellect. So, their adaptation to this growing wisdom of the bulk of humanity is to make their narrative increasingly bizarre, increasingly weird. You have probably noticed that in your news you are hearing stories in the social media scape which are increasingly bizarre and weird and like, what the hell? This is because it's a requirement. They are not able to use a more sophisticated strategy when they're operating from this finite intellect. And so they have become increasingly reliant on hyperbole. And they have their bag of tricks, which they have been using for a very long time, but these bag of tricks are becoming increasingly ineffective. Yet because they are very three-dimensional and not tapping into this extra-dimensional realm, which is the infinite source of wisdom, then they lack the creativity to develop a completely new paradigm or way of fulfilling their objectives. And in fact, if they were to expand into this extra dimensionality, then they would begin to question their own philosophical choices And so it is important to them that they do not make this expansion. And this is why, when those who fully commit themselves to the philosophical pathway of darkness must shut down their connection to the One, because their connection to the One is imbued with the qualities of compassion, of love, of caring, of sympathy, of sacrifice, and so on, which, from the mindset of exploitation, to parasitically feed oneself off a host, are debilitating qualities. So they cannot be imbued with something which weakens them. So they shut themselves down from their extra dimensionality. And this is a great limitation. When they had dominion over a population which is also not very expanded into extra dimensionality, then their superior intellectualism is enough. And they very easily have dominion. And this is why part of their farming strategy, the construction of the false narrative, is this continual frenetically paced focus in the mind. At all costs, they must prevent humanity from exploring its extra dimensionality. And if it does start creating these subgenres of extra dimensionality, then they will do their best to infiltrate and subvert it, expunge the sacred knowledge from the human culture, to keep humanity trapped in its mind. Yet, they have lost their grip. It is getting out of control. And they can do little but try and rumble through their bag of limited tricks to come up with some way to curb what is occurring. Yet, there has been crossed a point of no going back. And this nexus now is inevitable. So, them operating from this hyperbolic bag of tricks, throwing increasingly bizarre and weird stories at humanity, which are increasingly being rejected by this expanding humanity being, is occurring because the demarcation between truth and falsity has become so great. When the truth and the falsity are very, very similar, and there is a great deal of overlap, then it is much easier to deceive. But this subtlety has lost its effectiveness. Subtlety no longer gets the job done. To get the job done, they must use extreme demarcated points and narratives to maintain the focus and the veil of illusion. And so now the storyline is so removed from the truth that for those that have awakening eyes, it becomes much easier to see, because when it is like this, you can see it's easy to occlude and deceive. Yet when it becomes like this, now it's much more difficult. And if you have awakening eyes, it's clear as day that what they say is false. And this degree of falsity is maintained through a big part through the authority which is perceived of those that convey this false narrative. And these are the institutions like government, like mainstream media, like education, like the judicial system. But these also are diminishing in their authority. They are diminishing in reverence from the perspective of the greater population, who are increasingly becoming doubtful if these institutions deserve the authority with which they are bestowed, if they deserve to be believed unquestioningly as they have been in the past. So, eventually what is going to happen, and is already beginning to happen, as you will have seen from your own experience, if you are at a sort of quite developed level of awakening, you will notice that the lies of the narrative are becoming laughable. And when you hear these stories, it is with a giggle and a sense of absurdity that they expect that you will believe it. It's ridiculous. How can they possibly think I would believe that is true? Yet, what they are saying, the strategies they are using, the tactics they are employing, would have absolutely been enough to deceive your equal a generation ago. And perhaps even you 20 years ago. What has shifted is your degree of wakefulness. And you are emblematic of humanity's wakefulness. It is happening. Eventually, a point will be reached where those that are at the forefront of the push of the false narrative will say the things that they say, and it will be perceived by much of humanity as the same or very similar experience as a child of 3-4 years trying to deceive you with a lie which is so obvious to you, the full-grown adult, that it's laughable, that it's cute, that it's adorable, that this child is trying to deceive you, yet is so ineffective at it that it's cute, it's adorable. Oh, that's so cute that you would think I would believe you. This is where you are heading. So, this facade of falsity which has been maintained for a long time by those that construct your cultures, your societies, steering you towards their end goal, their ultimate vision of dystopia, where they are the neo-royalty and you are the neo-serfs of the new feudal system which they wish to implement on your earth. It will be stretched to such a point because of this increasing need to be hyperbolic, to be weird and bizarre, where you are left to a state of giggling and shaking your head, that they think you would believe such a load of nonsense. That eventually this thin facade will be stretched to such a degree that it will pop. And when it pops, there will be a very rapid revelation of what has been hidden by this facade. Everything will be questioned. And in all fields of human endeavor, of human knowing, there will be disclosure. This disclosure will be such a stark difference to what has been constructed as this false narrative that for many it will be very difficult to believe that the world in which they live could be so different from the world they have been led to believe they live. So, this disclosure will be controlled so that it is meted out to humanity at a rate which does not cause a sense of mass psychological traumatization, that it becomes a net negative rather than a net positive. Of course, the truth is a net positive, and yet there are some aspects which will be limited in what audience they are available to. And when the state of total wakefulness in the fourth dimensional state has been achieved, all information will be available to everyone. Yet, while still within the third density paradigm, there is some information which has been kept secret, the truth of your world, that is so horrific, so dastardly, so diametrically opposite to what you may believe, that it will be limited in who is given access to it. Because having access to that information would not have net benefit. In fact, would be a hindrance to the more prioritized objective of this time, which is the ascension of humanity. So, going about your life now, it is healthy at this time to be skeptical of what you hear. Resist the urge to automatically assume what you have heard is the truth. And instead develop the capacity to discern what is the truth. And this is a very necessary part of humanity's transition from this state of being asleep to a state of wakefulness. Humanity has been maintained in a state of slumber for a very long time because humanity has surrendered the responsibility on an individual basis of verifying the information that they receive and incorporate into their belief system. Those that construct the false narrative, they use their position and reputation of authority to lull you into a sense of acceptance. That what they give you as their form of their interpretation of reality is trustworthy enough that it can be adopted into your own belief system without being analysed, without being scrutinised, without being looked at with the skeptical lens. And this artifact exists in your societies because there was a time when those that dispensed information into the greater society were the tribal elders and those that supported this system of governance of your cultures. And all those that were part of this structure were part of the culture and did not see you as an underling, as a host from which they parasitically feed, but instead saw you as part of their extended family. And their objectives were your objectives, which was to be happy, to be abundant, to be safe, and so on. And so they disseminated information into your cultures which served this greater purpose. which you shared together, your leaders and you sharing the same objectives. And therefore it served no purpose for them to inject into your societies a false narrative. So, humanity has evolved with this propensity to believe the information coming from those which have been positioned as the authorities or the leaders of your communities. And this has been hijacked, this tendency. And this tendency is really a remnant artifact to demonstrate to you that when your societies are allowed to be organic, they are a very beautiful structure of nurturing of each other, where the sense of care and love coming from your leadership is so unquestionable that what they tell you can be taken into oneself without scrutiny, because their love and respect for you is so complete. But of course, this tendency is a vulnerability of humanity. In the presence of a force of darkness which has become significant enough that it can usurp those methods of influence which have developed from these early structures at the time of leadership lovingly caring for their flock. And of course, these are the mainstream media, entertainment media, government, education, judiciary system. These have been usurped by those that are focused around the darkness end of the spiritual spectrum, the unified malevolence, the cabal of darkness. And they are exploiting this propensity of humanity to take into themselves whatever they are told without scrutiny. So, the bridge which must be crossed where humanity finds itself at a place of liberation with free access to the truth, no longer being inundated with falsity, and then can return to this organic state where the information coming from the guardians of their societies and cultures can be trusted without scrutiny, because this is eventually will become the state of your societies. When there is a cross into the fourth density and you live in a state of unity as the humanity being, each of you an aspect of this same being, unified in the same love, unified in the same objective overall, which is to fulfill the divine purpose, as in to know thyself experientially, then the only purpose served will be a purpose of the light. And so for this deception from a leadership level into the rest of humanity will not be an aspect of your experience. But the bridge which takes you there is the bridge of scrutiny, is the bridge of analysis, is the bridge of taking responsibility to validate what you hear, to be sure that you are incorporating the truth and not falsity. So, with so much information coming into your sphere, you can understand that the onslaught of information, if that was also incorporated with a policy of scrutinizing every single piece, then your life would become very busy. You would have very little peace, because you would be perpetually trying to determine what is the truth and what isn't. So, a much easier way to do this is to find providers of information which are being motivated by the light. Characteristic of the light is an insatiable thirst for the truth, as one polarizes towards the light. More and more and more and more, they wish to know the truth of their reality. And of course, this is part of a more intrinsic urge, which is to know thyself, which is part of the more intrinsic to know the one. So, this is the thirst for truth. And there are those that have decided to quench this thirst, this insatiable thirst, by themselves discerning what is true and what is falsity. And then acting on this urge, also motivated by the light, in recognition that the greater humanity is the same being. And so they wish to share the truth with this greater aspect of themselves, although perhaps unconsciously, but motivated from a higher aspect in an intuitive way that the larger aspect is indeed them. And they will benefit if all benefit, because all are the same being. So, if you make it the effort to find those that are heralds of the truth, and you begin taking your information from there exclusively and using the mainstream only as a means of discerning what is my enemy up to today. How do they try to deceive me with this story? What are their objectives? The mainstream, as government and also the education and the judiciary and entertainment, are not exclusively 100% saturated with those motivated by the darkness. There are good players within them. So this is not a blanket statement. So there are those within the mainstream that are part of the narrative construction that do so from a place of virtue. So we are suggesting tendencies, not rules. But the tendency should be to more and more find information coming from those that are motivated by the virtue of the light. And you will find them in the mainstream and in the alternative forms of media, yet more so in the alternative, at this stage of your awakening. Then you can see that it is much easier to get information which is truthful without being burdened with this aspect of non-stop scrutiny. Yet it should never be surrendered entirely. You must always be skeptical. And when you hear something, even coming from a source that has earned your trust, has proved to you that they are motivated by the light, never 100% accept. But instead always keep open the window of possibility that perhaps this is an error. This person that I trust has provided this information in the belief that it is true, but there is still the possibility that it is not. And this, in a sense, keeps your head on a swivel. And so you cannot be blindsided by an absolute falsity, which you believe 100%. And as such, you cannot be fully diverted from the path to the light. You continue to cross this bridge of scrutiny, this bridge of skepticism. So, let us finish in this way. Humanity's awakening is taking on an exponential quality. And so, the rate at which you awake, you will have noticed, seems to be increasing. But as it is exponential, soon it is going to become so rapid, so intense, that it will begin to be perceived as a media war, information war. And the revelations will be hitting you at such a pace that it will be difficult to catch your breath. But those that are behind this dissemination of the light, of the truth, are doing their best to maintain a balance between what truths are let into your consciousness and the rate at which it is delivered, such that it does not overwhelm you. But it is going to be a very exciting time, and one which we also are very much excited to witness. So, even though the narrative seems to be getting weird and bizarre, understand this is characteristic of their attempt to maintain a balance with a force of light and truth which they cannot control. It is their final throes as they are overwhelmed. So we would like you to leave this channel feeling uplifted and positive about where you find yourself now, about where humanity is in this great cycle. The golden future for the human paradigm has reached an unstoppable momentum. All you need to do is now hang on, be part of the ride, and prepare yourself so when the threshold is crossed and the quantum leap is made into the fourth density, that you are part of this unified being which emerges from the birth canal of ascension to live this new paradigm and have access to the complete and total disclosure and revelation of the many secrets which have been hidden from humanity for so long. Thank you, and we love you.